few weeks had passed since the flight, but the ripples from that moment were still spreading quietly across the country. News channels had moved on to other stories, and social media had found new topics. But for Malik, life had shifted in ways that felt both small and big at the same time. He still went to school, still played chess during lunch, still read his favorite science books. But something inside him had changed, like a light had turned on that couldn't be turned off again. One morning, as he walked into his school library, a group of younger students were huddled around a table. They were watching something on a laptop. Malik wasn't trying to listen, but he heard one of the boys say, "That's him. That's Malik." He glanced over, and they noticed him. The group smiled and waved. One girl with glasses stood up and said, "You're so brave. I told my mom about you." Malik smiled softly. "Thank you," he said, then continued to the science section. It still felt strange to be noticed like that. He never wanted to be famous. All he had wanted that day was to fly in peace, read his book, and enjoy the gift his father had given him. But life had decided to write a bigger story, and now he was learning how to walk in it, step by step. At home, Judge Douglas had also returned to his usual schedule. Court cases, meetings, and long days at work continued as before. But he noticed something different in the letters he now received. Strangers wrote to him, not just to discuss law, but to thank him for showing calm strength. One man wrote, "You didn't just speak as a judge, you spoke as a father, and that meant everything." The judge didn't reply to every message. He didn't need to. Simply kept showing up, doing his work, and setting the same example. He had always tried to set for his son. One weekend, the local library invited Malik to speak at a community event. The theme was Voices That Inspire. At first, Malik was nervous. "I've never given a speech," he told his father. "You don't need a speech," Judge Douglas replied. "Just tell your truth." The library event was filled with people of all ages. Kids sat cross-legged on the carpet. Parents and grandparents filled the rows of chairs behind them. Some people came in quietly and stood in the back. When Malik was introduced, there was gentle applause. He walked up to the small stage holding a folded piece of paper, just in case he forgot what to say. He looked out at the crowd and took a deep breath. "My name is Malik," he said. "Some of you may know my story from a plane ride. I want to tell you about something even bigger than that." He paused for a moment, letting the room grow still. "I've learned that how people see you isn't always who you are. Sometimes you have to remind them, not with loud words, but with how you carry yourself. With truth, with calm, with kindness." Some people in the crowd nodded. A mother wiped her eyes gently. Malik continued. "That day on the plane, I felt small for a moment. But not because I was wrong. I felt small because someone didn't believe. I belonged. But now I understand I belonged before they even asked. And so do all of you." A quiet cheer rose in the back of the room. The children sitting near the front clapped. One little boy whispered to another, "He's like a superhero." After the event, people lined up to shake Malik's hand, thanked him for his words, for his strength, for his example. One elderly man placed his hand gently on Malik's shoulder and said, "You give me hope for the future, son." That evening, back at home, Malik sat on the porch with his father. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and purple. They watched it together, sipping lemonade. "You spoke beautifully," Judge Douglas said. "I was scared at first," Malik replied. "But then I remembered what you told me, that I didn't have to prove anything." "That's right," his father said. "You just had to be yourself." They sat in silence for a while, then Malik looked up. "Do you think the world is really changing?" The judge didn't answer right away, thought carefully before speaking. "I think the world doesn't change all at once," he said. "It changes through moments. One story, one lesson, one person deciding to see differently. And you, Malik, you gave the world one of those moments." Malik smiled. He didn't fully understand the weight of those words yet, but he felt them. Deep inside, the next morning, Malik received a package in the mail. It was from a publishing company. Inside was a printed children's book. The cover had a drawing of a boy sitting in an airplane seat, looking out the window with stars in the sky beyond him. The title read, "Malik's Window," a story about belonging. There was a letter inside, too. It said the book was inspired by his story and that children across the country would be reading it in schools. He showed the book to his father, who held it for a long time, running his hand over the cover. "You know what this means?" Judge Douglas said. "Kids who read this might grow up seeing the world differently. They might pause before they judge. They might speak up for someone else." Malik nodded, holding the book to his chest. Later that week, something unexpected happened. A reporter called and said that Janice Carter had made a donation to a youth scholarship fund in Malik's name. She had requested to remain private, but said she hoped the gesture would help other young students rise just like Malik. When Malik heard the news, he was quiet for a moment. "She didn't have to do that," he said softly. "No," his father agreed. "But maybe it's her way of learning and growing." Malik looked out the window again, the same way he had looked out of the plane that day. But this time, he felt light, strong, like nothing could shake the ground beneath him, because in the end, this story wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about truth, dignity, patience, and the quiet power of staying kind. Even when the world gives you a reason not to, Malik didn't shout. He didn't fight. He didn't run away. He sat down. He stayed calm. And because of that, a story was told. A story that traveled farther than any airplane. A story that touched hearts, changed minds, lit a path for others to follow. And all he wanted on that morning so long ago was to read his book and enjoy the view from a window in the sky. Now that window was open forever, and the world was watching. If you'd like, I can now create a short story version of this whole 5-part outline combined into one poem. By the time Malik's week at the science camp came to an end, things had already changed more than he could imagine. When he arrived, he was just another quiet student, blending into the crowd with his notebook, backpack, and big dreams.
Albert.
Now, everyone knew his name. They didn't just know him because of what happened on the plane. They knew him because of who he was: kind, thoughtful, curious, and always willing to help others. He had quickly become the student other kids turned to for help with a math puzzle, to check a lab result, or just to talk. One afternoon, while building a model of a solar rover, a girl in his group said, "You should be a teacher someday." Malik smiled. "I want to be a scientist, maybe a space engineer." "You could do both," she replied. On the last day of camp, each student was asked to share what they had learned and what they dreamed of doing next. When it was Malik's turn, he stood at the front of the small classroom with a calm but confident voice. "I learned that science is not just about facts and numbers," he said. "It's about solving real problems, helping real people. I want to build things that make life better, not just bigger. I want to explore space, but also help the people right here on Earth." The room filled with applause. One of the camp mentors took a photo of Malik that day, standing near his model rover, wearing his camp badge and that same quiet smile. Though she later posted it online with a simple caption, "Young minds like his give us hope. Proud to have taught this brilliant soul." That photo also began to spread. Back home, Malik's father watched the media attention continue to grow. News programs requested interviews. Schools asked Malik to speak at youth events. Letters and emails poured in from students, teachers, parents, and even strangers from across the country. One letter came from a woman who said she had once called the police on a group of boys near her house simply because she felt nervous. After seeing Malik's story, she said, "I've started asking myself why I assumed the worst. Your story helped me see something I never noticed about myself." Malik and his father read each letter together. Some made them smile, others made them pause. But all of them made one thing clear: the story had reached far beyond the cabin of that plane. One afternoon, Malik was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when his father walked in holding a letter in a white envelope. "This just came in the mail," Judge Douglas said, handing it to his son. Malik opened it carefully. Inside was a formal invitation printed on thick paper. It was from a well-known university. The letter read, "We would be honored to invite Malik Douglas as a guest speaker at our upcoming Youth Future Leaders Conference. His voice and presence would add great value to the event. Malik's eyes widened. Dad, this is the university where Neil deGrasse Tyson studied. His father chuckled, like the universe is opening new doors. They both sat there quietly for a moment. Neither of them had asked for attention. Neither had tried to go viral. They just wanted a peaceful journey, a simple flight from one place to another. But now that their story was in the world, it was clear it had become something bigger. Meanwhile, Janice Carter, the woman from the flight, watched the same news reports from her living room. The video had changed her life too, though not in the way she expected. She had stepped away from her job on a nonprofit board, choosing to take time to reflect. The letter she sent to Malik and his father was just the beginning. She started attending workshops on equity and bias. She volunteered at a community center where children from all backgrounds came for tutoring and support. She didn't announce it online. She didn't try to get attention. She just showed up. One afternoon, while reading a book to a group of third graders, a little boy with curly hair raised his hand and asked, "Why do you come here every week?" Janice smiled gently. "Because I still have a lot to learn. And the best way to learn is by listening." That answer stayed with her. Later that week, Janice received an email. It was from the airline. The message said they were starting a new passenger awareness program to help travelers recognize and address bias. The program was inspired by the incident she had been part. Ivanchi had been invited to help shape it. She sat at her desk for a long time before replying. Then she finally typed, "I would be honored to help. Thank you for giving me the chance to grow and be better." Back at Malik's school, the principal made an announcement during assembly. "Today we celebrate one of our own. Malik Douglas has not only made our school proud, he's made the whole country stop and think. We'll be naming our science lab after him. Let it remind every student who walks through its doors that brilliance can come in any form." The crowd stood up and clapped. Some of Malik's classmates looked at him with big smiles. Others gave him a thumbs up. Malik, sitting quietly near the back, lowered his head shyly, but his smile was impossible to hide. At home that evening, Judge Douglas pulled out a photo album and showed Malik a picture from years ago. It was a photo of Malik at 6 years old, standing beside a homemade rocket made of cardboard and tape. "You've always looked to the stars," he said. Malik laughed. "Back then, I thought I could fly to Mars. And now?" his father asked. "Now I know I'll get there, just not in a cardboard rocket." They both laughed, and then the room grew quiet for a moment. Malik looked out the window at the night sky. The stars blinked softly above, distant but steady. Like a hero, he didn't feel famous. He just felt ready. Ready for more learning, more exploring, more growing. Ready to be someone who didn't just speak with words but with quiet strength, steady steps, and open eyes. His story wasn't just about that flight anymore. It had become something larger, something that reminded people of what really matters: respect, kindness, truth, and the belief that every person, no matter their age, color, or seat on the plane, deserves to be seen. Truly seen, would you? Like me, to now continue with part 5, the final part in the same style and length. The wheels touched down gently, and the plane rolled across the runway as the city below welcomed its new arrivals. Malik looked out of the window, eyes filled with calm, though his thoughts were still swimming from everything that had happened. The sky outside had a soft golden glow, and the clouds looked like pillows drifting apart. It was peaceful. But inside the cabin, the memory of what had taken place hours earlier still lingered quietly. The captain's voice came on, warm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please remain seated as we taxi to the gate. Thank you for flying." With us today, Malik sat back in his seat. His book was now back inside his backpack. He didn't feel like reading anymore, just sat, watching, waiting. The woman beside him, Janice, was silent. She hadn't said another word since she whispered her apology mid-flight. Her eyes were on her hands, which she kept folded tightly on her lap. Across the aisle, a young woman with a laptop open quietly glanced at Malik now and then. She had been watching from the start, ever since Janice first questioned the boys' presence. She had recorded the moment when the officers came and when Judge Douglas walked in. She hadn't planned on sharing it, but now, something told her the world needed to see it. When the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, people stood up and reached for their bags. Janice remained seated, almost frozen. Malik also waited, not rushing. He was raised to let others go first. He always did. The young woman with the laptop leaned toward Malik and whispered, "You're amazing. Just wanted you to know that." Malik looked at her, surprised, then smiled a little and nodded. Janice suddenly stood, grabbed her purse, and stepped into the aisle. But instead of walking out, she turned to Judge Douglas, who had also stood up now, just a row behind. "Sir," she said quietly, "I truly didn't know who you were, but now I realize it shouldn't have mattered." Judge Douglas looked at her, calm but serious. "That's correct. It shouldn't have." Janice lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." He gave a polite nod, nothing more. Malik joined his father, and together they stepped out of the plane and into the bright airport walkway. The terminal buzzed with life, people reuniting, rushing, laughing, waiting. Malik looked around, trying to take it all in, but he didn't say anything until they reached baggage claim. "Dad," he said softly, "do things like this happen all the time?" Judge Douglas thought for a moment before answering. "Not all the time, but they happen. When they do, how we respond tells the world who we are." Malik nodded, thinking deeply. Near the baggage carousel, the young woman who had spoken to Malik earlier opened her phone. She uploaded the short video she had taken onto her social media page. Her caption read, "This 14-year-old boy was accused of not belonging in first class, just because of how he looked. What happened next was powerful. His grace, his father's calm truth, this story deserves to be seen. Hashtag let Malik sit the video." It started spreading faster than she expected. Within hours, it reached thousands of people, then tens of thousands. By that evening, it had reached national platforms. Malik didn't know any of this yet. He was on his way to his science camp with his father. They stopped for lunch, and the judge gently encouraged Malik to enjoy the week ahead. "You're going to meet smart kids just like you," he said, "and you'll have stories to tell. Real stories." Malik smiled, the thought bringing back a bit of excitement. "Do you think I'll get to build a robot?" "I'd be shocked if you didn't," his dad replied with a grin. Back in another city, Janice sat in her hotel room. Her phone buzzed again and again. Friends were messaging her. News notifications flashed. Her picture had been taken from the flight and posted online. Some comments were harsh, others simply disappointed. But almost all said the same thing: "You were wrong." She turned off her phone and stared out the window. It had never occurred to her how fast the world could change in a single moment. One assumption, one phone call. And now she was part of a story, just not the part she had wanted to play. By the next morning, the video was being discussed on morning television shows and online news platforms. People from all over were talking about Malik, how calmly he had handled the situation, how composed his father had been, and how much the moment revealed about the silent assumptions people still carry. A well-known host on a daytime show said, "This young man didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He showed the kind of grace most of us can only hope to learn. His father reminded us that respect should not depend on status, but on humanity." Malik's school saw the video and posted a message of support on their website, praising his character and announcing they would be recognizing him at an upcoming event. His teachers shared their own stories of his kindness and brilliance. At the science camp, Malik arrived quietly, without telling anyone who he was. But on the second day, one of the other students came up to him and said, "Hey, are you that kid from the plane?" Malik hesitated, unsure what to say. The boy smiled and held out a fist. "You're cool, man. What you did, that was legendary." Soon, more kids began gathering around him, not in a strange way, but with respect. They wanted to know what it felt like, how he stayed so calm. Malik didn't have all the answers. He just shared what he knew. "I didn't want to prove anything," he said. "I just wanted to read my book." That became the quote that many news outlets shared later. "I just wanted to read my book." Simple, honest, and powerful. Meanwhile, Janice made a decision. She wrote a formal apology and sent it to the airline. She didn't try to explain her actions away. She didn't defend herself. She simply said, "I was wrong. I reacted from a place of assumption, and it caused harm. I will do better. Also wrote a personal letter to Malik and his father. She didn't expect forgiveness, but she hoped they would at least know she was trying to understand. The judge read the letter quietly and passed it to Malik. The boy looked at the page, then folded it and put it away. Maybe she's learning, Malik said. His father nodded. Maybe she is. The world kept watching, not because of the mistake, but because of the way a young boy and his father handled it. With grace, with strength, with dignity. And now, people had a new image of what belonging looked like. Not a seat number, not a boarding class, but a young black boy in a blazer, reading about stars, who refused to be moved. Malik looked out of the window, pretending to watch the people still boarding the plane. But his thoughts were stuck in the moment that had just passed. The officers were gone now. His boarding pass and ID were back in his bag. His book was open, on his lap, but he wasn't reading anymore. He just sat there, quiet, with a look on his face that was hard to describe. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, like confusion and sadness mixed together. Next to him, Janice tried to act as if nothing had happened. She adjusted her scarf, opened a magazine, and crossed her legs. But her hands were not steady. Her eyes kept moving toward Malik, and every time they did, she quickly looked away. The moment Judge Douglas walked onto the plane had changed everything. For her, back at the gate, Judge Douglas spoke to the gate manager privately. Claire, the flight attendant, was still shaken. She had worked dozens of flights and seen all kinds of passengers. But this was the first time something like this had happened right in front of her, so unfair, so sudden. She returned to the front of the cabin and whispered to Malik, "Would you like some juice or water, sweetheart?" Malik nodded softly without saying anything. A few rows behind, a woman who had been watching the whole situation leaned forward and whispered to her husband she thought he didn't belong because of his skin. That's all it was. Sad, the man replied. He didn't even blink. That kid has more grace than most adults I know. The flight crew prepared for takeoff. Passengers were still settling into their seats. Judge Douglas was now seated in business class, not far from his son. He had given up his own first-class seat so Malik could enjoy the experience fully. He kept his eyes forward, calm on the outside, but quietly disappointed. Not at the officers. They had a job to do and had handled it professionally once the truth came out. No, what saddened him was how quickly someone's bias had turned a peaceful morning into a scene just 5 minutes earlier. Everything had been normal. Now, whispers floated through the cabin like dust in sunlight. Some passengers typed messages on their phones. Others shared looks. And Janice. Well, Janice sat there in silence, her magazine unopened now. She wasn't proud of what she had done. In fact, her mind kept replaying it like a broken record. At the time, she truly thought she was being careful. But now, she started to ask herself questions she hadn't asked before. Why had she assumed that the boy didn't belong? Why had she gone straight to security? Why hadn't she trusted the flight crew's word? The answers made her uncomfortable. She didn't like the feeling. She wasn't a hateful person, or at least she had never seen herself that way. But something about that moment, the boy alone, the seat, the surprise in her mind, had triggered a reaction. A reaction that said more about her than it ever did. About Malik, as the plane backed away from the gate and moved toward the runway, Malik slowly took a sip of orange juice. His father made eye contact with him and gave a small nod. No words, just a gesture that said, "You're okay. You did nothing wrong." The plane picked up speed. It rushed down the runway and lifted into the sky. For a few minutes, the engines roared, and no one spoke. People stared out the windows, flipped through in-flight magazines, or closed their eyes to rest. But Malik's mind was still busy. He thought about the science camp he was going to, the experiments he would get to try, the professors he would meet. It was supposed to be the best week of his young life. But now, there was a small shadow over the moment, something he hadn't expected. He didn't feel small, though no. If anything, he felt taller inside. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Leek stood up quietly and walked to the restroom. On his way back, he noticed a few passengers, smiling gently at him, quiet signs of support. He gave them a small nod in return. One older woman even whispered, "You handled that like a young gentleman." "Thank you," Malik replied softly. As he returned to his seat, Janice finally looked at him. Her eyes were different now, not sharp, but unsure. As she started, then stopped. Malik didn't say anything. She tried again. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble. I was mistaken." Malik looked at her not with anger, but with something closer to wisdom beyond his years. "It's okay," he said, then paused. "Just next time, maybe ask before assuming." Janice blinked. She didn't know what to say. His response was calm, direct, and completely fair. And somehow it made her feel even smaller than if he had shouted. Malik turned back to his seat and picked up his book again. Behind him, a few passengers exchanged quiet nods. They had heard the conversation. One man even wiped a tear from his eye and whispered, "That boy is going places." Back in business class, Judge Douglas had seen the exchange. He hadn't heard the words, but he could read the body language. He leaned back in his seat and allowed himself a small breath of relief. His son had not only stayed strong, he had stayed kind. The rest of the flight passed with no more incidents. Claire brought Malik a small dessert tray and said, "Just a little something for our young star." He smiled for the first time in a while. Janice kept to herself, barely touching her meal. Her mind was still restless, full of thoughts she hadn't faced before. She would think about this moment for a long time. Though it made her uncomfortable, maybe that was the beginning of something important, change. Hours later, as the plane began its descent, Malik looked out of the window. The clouds parted, and the land below came into view. He felt excited again about the camp, the new experiences, and the adventure ahead. He closed his book and smiled quietly to himself. He had taken his seat. He had stayed strong. And now, he was ready for what came next. The airport was full of noise, movement, and rushing footsteps. People were lining up to check their bags, grabbing coffee, or searching for their gates. Among all the busy travelers, a young black boy named Malik stood quietly with his father near the first-class gate. Malik wore a neat blue blazer, dark jeans, and glasses that slid down his nose every now and then. He looked like a child straight out of a magazine ad for brilliance. In his hand, he held a book about space science. At just 14 years old, Malik had just been accepted into an advanced STEM program, and this flight was part of his celebration, a gift from his proud father. It was the first time Malik would fly first class, and he couldn't stop smiling. His father, Judge Raymond Douglas, a well-respected federal judge, gently squeezed his shoulder. "You've earned this, son. Just enjoy the ride. I'll be right back. Need to make a call before we board." Malik nodded and joined the boarding line when they announced Group 1. He was quiet and polite, scanning his boarding pass and stepping into the airplane with a mix of nervousness and excitement. He had flown before, but never like this. He found his seat, too, a window seat. It's a soft leather, wide space, and even the blanket folded on the seat felt new to him. He settled in and opened his book, already forgetting about everything around him as he read about black holes and galaxies. But then something happened. A few minutes later, a woman in her early 50s walked onto the plane. Her name was Janice Carter. She wore a pearl necklace, a sharp white jacket, and carried herself like someone who believed the world should follow her rules. As she walked toward her seat to be, right next to Malik, she noticed him immediately. Her expression changed. Her steps slowed. She looked again at her boarding pass, then at him. "Excuse me," she said loudly to the flight attendant nearby. Is this... Is this boy supposed to be in first class?" The flight attendant, a young woman named Claire, looked up from her checklist, surprised by the question. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you need help finding your seat?" "No. I know where my seat is," Janice said, now lowering her voice but not her suspicion. "But something seems off here. He's alone. He's a child." Claire smiled kindly. "He has a ticket. I scanned it myself. He's in the right place." Janice didn't look convinced. She stood for a moment, glaring at Malik, who was now fidgeting with the edges of his book, pretending to read. His face was calm, but his eyes showed confusion. He didn't say anything. He didn't want trouble. Janice walked past her seat and toward the flight deck. She leaned over to speak with another crew member. Then she pulled out her phone. With sharp fingers, she dialed the airport emergency line. "I'm on flight 709, she said. "There's a young man in first class who doesn't look like he belongs here. He doesn't have an adult with him. I'm just concerned. You might want to check it out." She ended the call, returned to her seat, and looked at Malik with a strange mix of confidence and irritation, like she had done something righteous. Malik stayed silent, but he could feel the eyes. It's not just Janice's eyes, but now two other. Nearby passengers were looking too. Claire approached again and whispered to Malik, "Don't worry, sweetie." "Everything's fine," Malik nodded, trying to keep his face strong. But inside, his chest felt heavy. What had he done wrong? He had a ticket. He had boarded just like everyone else. Was it the color of his skin? Was it because he didn't speak up loud enough? Or because he was sitting alone? The questions buzzed inside him like bees. Minutes later, 2 airport officers arrived at the aircraft door. Claire met them, confused. "We're called here?" she asked. "Yes," one officer said. "There was a report about a passenger possibly in the wrong cabin." Claire looked back, already guessing who had made the call. "It's the young man in 2A, the officer added gently. Malik's heart skipped. He put down his book as the 2 officers came toward him. "Good morning, son," one of them said. "Can we see your boarding pass, please?" Malik handed it over. He didn't argue. His fingers shook a little, but he made sure to keep eye contact. The officer looked at the boarding pass and then at the screen on his phone. The name matched. The seat matched. "Do you have any ID?" the officer asked. Malik opened his backpack slowly and handed over his school ID. It had his name, picture, and address. He waited as they read it carefully. "I'm waiting for my dad," Malik said softly. "He'll be here soon." The other officer nodded. "You haven't done anything wrong. We just needed to verify." And then, just as things were starting to settle, someone stepped into the plane. It was Judge Douglas. He had returned from his phone call. Just in time to see the officers standing by his son's seat. His calm face changed. "Excuse me," he said, walking over. "Why are you questioning my son?" The officers turned, recognizing him instantly. Judge Douglas Surwey had a report. Janice froze in her seat. She had heard that name before. In the news. On the bench. A federal judge. A respected man. This boy was his son. Claire looked back and forth between the judge and Janice. The puzzle pieces clicked. Judge Douglas remained calm but firm. This young man is a minor traveling with his father. He holds a valid first-class ticket. He is not a threat. He is not suspicious. He is not a problem. So why exactly is he being questioned? No one spoke. The officers exchanged looks. The flight attendant looked down. Janice began to shift uncomfortably in her seat. Malik looked at his father, not with fear, but with trust, with safety. One of the officers handed back the documents. "All clear here," he said quietly. "Sorry for the interruption." Judge Douglas didn't smile. "You owe him an apology, not me him." The officer turned to Malik. "Sorry, young man." Malik nodded. Janice couldn't meet anyone's eyes now. She had made the call. She had caused the scene. But her assumption had just collided with reality. She didn't know where to look anymore, and the flight hadn't even taken off yet.